Here? I can't see.
A couple of people showed up here. We have Doug and we have Heiner. You should be on what's it called? Grid view.
Gallery view.
I should be on grid view.
Gallery
in the top
view.
right corner.
Yeah. And once you're there, you will see Doug and Heiner. Heiner is walking around under an umbrella. Anyway, that's super cool, Tisha. I want to try a cacao ceremony and the gods of the past.
Okay, I'm going to sign out and sign in again because my Zoom says that there's only you and me.
Oh, that's weird. Okay.
It's very personal, you and me.
Well, I'm right there with you, but I'd like to be there with the other people. Well, try signing out and coming back, and we see.
Okay, I'll sign out and come back. Bye for now.
Yeah. So, hi, guys.
Hey, so Heiner, you're on the go again, huh?
Where are you, Heiner?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. I'm in the streets of Berlin.
Yeah. Are you on your way somewhere?
Yes. There is this deep ocean fish, an exhibition in the Academy of Arts, where these guys discuss this multimodal. The guy who is behind it, it's a Flusser archive. And these are friends. And I want to be there. That's why I'm going with the bus to have a more stable connection. Otherwise, I would be in the tube. So I'm fine, and it's raining a little.
Okay.
And the bus I have to catch in a moment, so I have to run.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you for taking us on a walk. That's cool.
Sure, I tow you around Berlin one day.
Yeah, you really should. We should just follow you around and see where you end up. Well, cool. Well, a whole bunch of people were somehow interested in this particular conversation today. I saw a bunch of new names showing up, but nobody is here yet. But well, you guys are, which is perfectly lovely. But I expected some new faces. Anyway, where's he going? To the Mehlungsdam. So anyway, this conversation is about the idea of, well, what does it really take to be a we, or do we sometimes fail to be a we when we thought we were, or do we have assumptions that turn out not necessarily to be so about what it is? And it's not the first time I've thought about that, but it came up in part from a comment from Darren Stevenson on some thread, and it sort of rang a bell for me. That in a certain way, it explains a whole lot of things, that if we're sort of in the same space and we're trying to do something together, but we haven't really noticed that we're not really on the same page. We don't want the same thing. We don't have the same assumption of the rules. Then it doesn't work so well. You're back, Tisha. Do you see, you should see Doug. Heiner is taking a bus in Berlin. He's in and out.
Heiner, he's on the move.
He's always on the move, yeah, to strange places.
My goodness.
Yeah. So Tisha, so I'm trying to sort of present the point of this particular meeting, which is the idea of whether there's a certain assumption of what the we is, which might not have been made explicitly, and that might get in the way of really functioning like a we. Like many people walk into a meeting or a group or a relationship with an idea of actually thinking they know what's going on, and half of the time they don't, and then that creates friction later when we realize we're not at all in the same place. So the question is that about right, or what do we do about that? How do we need a better way of creating a group, or do we just need to be more conscious of it, which is part of my inclination? If you're just sort of aware of it, if we were aware of, hey, Doug and I were in a particular space, and then Tisha came in and she was in a totally different kind of space about what's going on. If we were just aware of that, then we could better navigate it. But if we assume that we all have to agree on what's going on, then we end up fighting or confused, not understanding why the other people are so stupid or something, where really they're somewhere else.
I'm actually participating in a group right now that is extremely diverse. And the whole, let's see, we've had 3 meetings. In order for us to come to a place of a we've had to determine what we're we about. And those common values are nonviolence, solidarity, commitment to communicate, allowing for differences, the fertile ground of diversity. So there are many things we don't agree on. In fact, we don't agree on the definition of the word woman. So I was very attracted to come to this meeting because I find that people generally, especially since the 80s, well, no, I'm going to go back to the 60s. Since the 60s, that Western love and the spirit of there's only one is very awkward to me as a person of color. So anyways, that's sort of my introduction to the we, and it in the way in which the world is both interconnected and wildly diverse. It's vital that there's an understanding.
So now I would say I love diversity. I love when there's a lot of different things going on. So I actually don't want everybody to agree on everything. But I think there's sort of a meta agreement or something about what's our way of engaging that's important. I don't want to agree. I don't want to have all think the same thoughts or anything like that. I'd like to have some original, surprising things happen. But I'd maybe like to agree on sort of what exactly. There's some, it doesn't even have to be voiced. Like sometimes some people find that they're sort of have a similar vibe, and it's interesting to then explore our diversity. But then another person might show up and be in a different place, and sort of then it breaks that thing that was sort of happening, not because they have a different view on something, but because they didn't really have the same way of engaging. That's a little bit fussy, but I'd like to have more of a grasp on that.
I have certain charge around we. Because generally the folks that invoke it, a strikingly large amount of the time, are projecting a kind of power and aggression and imposition that's assertive, and it's used like a weapon. And I think there's a shared connection, state, and field that's co-created by people when they come together. But it's a sum and result and product of each individual showing up and being present and contributing on sort of an energy level. And that the whole idea of a we as a thing separate and apart from the people that are comprising it, that are co-creating it and making it happen in real time, is a really illusory thing, and that ironically, when it's asserted as a thing apart from, my experience is that it's usually in service to othering others, that there are people not part of it. Like with striking frequency, like the we is protectively asserted because there's somebody who doesn't belong or isn't part of it or is acting adversely to it or is oppositional or hasn't earned the right or hasn't achieved the level or whatever the othering is. For me, it's where Tisha went in terms of values. It's the agreement, the value to which I agree, and which the other people agree, and those and value in this context for me is meta, is sort of a meta dimension of how are we going to communicate with the, how do I talk to you? How are you going to talk to me? How do I relate to, on a values basis, openness and receptivity and curiosity and inclusion and all of that, which inform what I do or say. It's sort of meta to what I do or say. And that's the level of cohesion and connection and agreement by in between that is sort of the secret sauce. And with that, I'm complete.
Heiner, you raised your hand.
Yes, Doug, I'm fully with you. It is this old game of inclusion and exclusion. And you see me being raised as a German. We had with the Nazis the we, and it was never clear it was the family, the region, the tribe, the nation, but always these terms have been misused. So I'm very, very sensitive when people say we out of context or out of the situation, because the meaning is always depending on the situation. So I can only, and I think I mentioned it before in our groups here, that in German we say Zusammenhang, Zusammenhalt. So ohne Zusammenhang, kein Zusammenhalt. Without something common like work, feeling, experience, that's why we speak about work nets, there is no Zusammenhalt, no cohesion, nothing which holds us together. It is just we observe and hop in and out. So commitment and achievement is connected for me to really bind a group together. And that's why we work with these young people on me, we, you, they, and other models, because the ego eye or the worm's eye and the bird's eye have to come together through concretion. This was my sermon for the day.
So now part of my issue is if it's happening to some degree, but then there's something that goes off about, and that speaks to what you said, Doug. I'm to some degree talking about Like if we're having a meeting here, we're five and it's really working well and that we're having a certain cohesion and it's good. Somebody might show up that's on a different vibe where we maybe all feel they're coming from a different place. Do I want to exclude that person who shows up? Not really, but I'd like to sort of identify that. And maybe if the five of us were really cool with this vibe we had going on, we might point out that, well, we already had this thing happening, so maybe be quiet or join it or something. Or, so I'm sort of protesting against that the vibe might be thrown off by one person who are somewhere totally different who shows up. Would we then want to, well, usually we recalibrate in some way, but then it becomes a new sort of average. And that's okay, that's nice, but it's at the same time, I'm not happy with that. Like, I really would like to follow a certain group sense. And part of my motivation for these particular meetings here is to maybe develop that sense of what's going on for the group here. And it's interesting and a challenge when somebody shows up who doesn't get that, who doesn't see that at all, who's like, they're in their own thing, this is what's going on, how's everybody, or what about Trump or something, which they have a right to do, but it's like, they obviously don't feel what I'm feeling, and that's irritating personally. And as a facilitator, I'm like, what do I do? Do I sort of do I tell them or make a lesson out of it? Do we just let it slide? Do we just change the course of the meeting? I don't know. So that's in part that I'd like to have more clarity of without it becoming excluding somebody. So I kind of see it in the direction of open space, that there's no need to exclude anybody. There's no reason to say that, well, you're not allowed to exist in our space at all. I think it's more of a question of, well, if you just want to sort of chat about Trump, then maybe go over to the drink section and chat with whoever's hanging out there while we're having this deep dive thing going on here. It's just a matter of using the space. And that speaks to the topic that if we feel we're stuck in one space, there's only this space, then we end up kind of fighting for it a little bit, or having to protect it or exclude people who sort of don't get it or things like that, which is not pleasant. So I think ultimately it's some kind of having enough space for it, and to notice when there's a natural division that these people want to talk about this, these people want to talk about something else, so let's split up or something, go in each a corner, and then maybe check back later and see where we ended up. I mean, it could be done gently if we had enough space for it. But the main thing I'm calling for is sort of the awareness of when it happens.
Well, I want to speak to this particular format because this container, which is about an hour, it's finite. And so we really are stuck in one place. I mean, the option is, as a facilitator, whoever is facilitating needs to hold the place and the space for the container with an awareness. And if the facilitator doesn't intervene and the group itself, each of the participants, are not equally skilled at being able to stay on task for an hour, then we are railroaded off into some other direction. But if this experiment is one where we are to be able to explore both the group dynamic and our personal skill level, the onus is both on the group, the facilitator, and the individual to be open to direct feedback as a reminder, because it's not just visiting someone at a coffee table. It's not just we have a short amount of time as an exploration, which is why participating in this format has been really exciting for me on some level. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So I would say the context is very critical. How we actually engage in identifying the space. And also, we don't get a practice of engaging in giving people appropriate feedback unless we're in a sticky situation. So we have to have spaces like this to be able to make mistakes, get good feedback, maybe wake up the next day with an idea that, oh, I could have done that so much better, and the next time I will, if that makes any sense. But in this format, I think it's important that the facilitation be both made aware to the participants that the facilitator will engage if that is the structure of the 1 hour meeting, or if it's just going to be a flow, then it's not necessary, because we've had experiments where the flow just happened and there was really no facilitating. We just kind of went with the conversation.
A piece of the puzzle that you mentioned in passing in that, which is the idea of time. And I've spent just a huge amount of time thinking about that. And trying to unlearn and deprogram around time driving things as sort of an imperative, or the defining constraint or scarce element. And I just wonder whether, the values choice as it relates to folks coming in that may be out of alignment or harmony with the pre-existing on arrival of everybody who's there, the disruption in the field and the issue of, do we have the generosity to deal with that, or prioritize or shift? Or we have the implication is there's a higher imperative or driver around preservation of what was before their arrival. And so how do we minimize their disruption of our party? And you add a layer, Sam and I have been in this space a whole bunch of times, you add a layer of imperative around doing something or producing something, you add a project or concrete undertaking dimension to it, and that whole thing gets put through the roof. It's like, gotta keep the train on the track and moving, and can't divert to taking care of or addressing or dealing with the person who's bringing disruptive energy or inconsistent energy. And I just wonder whether the important stuff is in that human dimension of those disharmonies. And the piece for me is, how do we deal with, how we deal with those, you know, how collectives or groups of people deal with those when they happen, and whether the human being dimension of things needs a seat at the table and a priority of attention and measure to divert to that, or to shift to that, or to focus on that, as a emergent call or demand when somebody lands with a clunk, that it's in service to all to sort of tend to that from a values place, with the principle being, how do we as a collective respond to the disruptive individual, and can that individual be brought into the fold, invited and supported into the greater grandeur. And with that, I'm complete.
In the last meeting that I was in, time is really an issue because we were crafting a statement with 20 people in the room where everyone has equal input, and I'm the facilitator, me. It was a 3-hour period. I was ad hoc facilitator. I facilitated the last one. I think, to answer your question directly, Doug, we meet these things with compassion. You know, I agree, the human element is critical. I was asked, and the feedback that I got, I was asked, as the facilitator, am I able to speak my piece and be a full participant in the group itself? And my answer was yes. I said, our group is very diverse, and I trust the conversations that are going on and the level of consciousness. My attention is to the energy and the circle at hand, so that there's a flow, and I am often triggered. My job as facilitator is to model what it is to be able to both be present, engaged in my humanity, and keep the flow open, which means I must be willing to have this open awareness of conflict within me and attention to time. And there is a magical element to time, I will add, because it can stretch and it can pass very quickly. But mostly with 20 people, my job as facilitator is to be able to give a sense to the room that time is stretched, that no one is being rushed, and yet they're encouraged to actually be on point. As facilitator, I did have to intervene and address, again, the context, our time frame, and our timing. And with that, an energy dissipated because the group remembered our mutual purpose as a we. And while the one person who was highly charged and wanting to get their point across, the group dynamic did not allow for that engagement again, if that makes any sense. I want to say one more thing about time. A longtime activist, radical lesbian feminist, said, when I noticed that you didn't have a timer, I got really nervous. And she said, but somehow you managed to have everyone have their time to speak, and we had time to wrap it up, and we had time to check out. I don't know what happened, and all I could say to her was magic.
So, so one possibility is very skilled facilitation, like which is in part what you're talking about there, to sort of manage a group if we're forced to be in the same space. If not, I'm always sort of looking in part for possibly technological solutions of how could we have maximal fluidity for all of us, so everybody can do exactly what they would like to do at any point. So like if we're in a meeting and we get bored with what's going on, we could drift somewhere else and do something else. That's not really very possible with the way we're meeting here, but potentially it could become possible that it would sort itself out, that if something else becomes more exciting, then we go over there, like an open space sort of format. And the people who really want to draft this statement that needs to be done at the end of the meeting, they would stick to their agreement. They would police their space and say, if you want to talk about something else, go over there. And there would be an over there, so it would be possible. So I'm potentially, ideally, very idealistically speaking, there's infinite space and everybody can do exactly what they want. But that's often, we have these constraints of like time, of the meeting, and we need to connect with this thing, and our only tool here is this Zoom thing. I mean, we don't have a way of drifting around. But I ultimately think that's the answer, that everybody could, of course, do what they want. And if they don't quite understand what's going on, we can help each other to say, well, this here, we have a target. Over there, they're just shooting the breeze. And over there, they're just sitting quietly doing nothing. And there should be free choice for everybody. Nobody has to be forced to do anything. But it has to somehow be explicit. It has to be possible to go somewhere else. Nobody should, of course, be allowed to take over and make their agenda be what runs the whole thing, unless that was what we had in mind. So, but it's not nice to kick anybody out or make them shut up. So they can have the room over there. So anybody who wants to listen to that can do that. So I think I'm complete with that.
I just want to say you actually do have the technology to give someone else another room.
Yeah, it just sucks in Zoom. I mean, it's meant for sort of getting people up all at the same time. So there's no good way of somebody to decide we're just gonna have a little side room. Visible is there.
It does require a level of facilitation for every person. It means that every person needs to be able to, not just the facilitator, but the control is the facilitator, because they have the buttons. But that means that the facilitator needs to have a meta expression of being able to hold the one meeting where everybody is in agreement, plus attention to the other meeting at the same moment, to allow them to the other flow to actually go to another room. And that still is a level of facilitation, and it still is the human element of compassion and the finesse and the timing. So it still comes back to the individual being fully engaged and prepared to hold the space. When you say yes to actually facilitate a circle, people are giving up their power to you to be able to create a context of safety and flow.
So is there some kind of key or awareness that makes this flow more easily? Because I think ultimately there's no problem. I mean, people just go and do what they would like to do. But there's a problem if we don't notice, if we think I have to stay here, even though the rest of the people don't at all agree with what I'm doing, but I have to stay here. So if we were aware of that went on, that there's just a matter of, well, you want this. So if there's an overall meta facilitation or an awareness from the most of the people present that this is what's going on, this is what you want to do, that's perfectly all right, but maybe a little bit over there. If that awareness was there earlier, we would waste much less time sort of spending an hour finding out that we're not doing the same thing. We should know that in a few seconds, really, that hey, okay, cool what you're doing, but there's a group for that there. So how can that sense be developed where it's not just you're wrong, but it's more like, oh, this is what you want. Okay, I get it. Cool. Let's see how we can make that happen. And who else wants to join in?
There's something, Tisha, that you said that really resonated, and it's about this idea of modeling in that role, and sort of projecting the energy and projecting the state of mind and the presencing and the listening. And I know, at least for me, letting go of ownership and attachments was critical. That I really had to let go of my stuff. Whatever it was I wanted to bring, or what I thought, or what I believe, or what was internalized proprietarily as, that was possessive and that was ownership centric. That there was no way to be present and to listen on a fully embodied and connected way without letting go of all of that stuff. Because if I carried any of it in, it was sort of, that's the percentage diversion of my attention resource. And the less of that resource I'm applying to listening to others and paying attention, and and listening to others, not just in terms of people speaking, but the ones that aren't speaking, and how people are reacting, and the energy flows and what's going on across the room. And I finally got to a place where I just gave up the ghost. Like, if I want to be present and accounted for fully, then I got to leave everything outside. I got to leave my stuff outside. And if an inquiry is made, if there's a curiosity or an energy that asks me directly, then it's always there. It's not like I've lost it or given it away or forgotten it. But it's not a living driver. And a big part of the challenge in terms of the feeling into and the harmonization of communication seems to revolve around folks who have things they are bringing, on an ownership level, where it's like, that's what's filling, being heard, wanting to make a point, being heard, whatever it is. And if you got a room full of individuals, each with their own story and narrative and thing, how do you, on a fundamental level, how do you even enable everybody to share? And the shift to true sharing, where there's as much generosity in the folks who are listening as there is in the person who's offering whatever they're offering, is the tricky thing. Like that's the how do you achieve openness and inquiry without audience sort of cognitively divided between their own stuff and what's going on. And I'm complete.
Sam, you put your hand up first, I think.
Yeah, I've been participating in some of these conversations for quite a while, and I actually don't understand a lot of what coming to this present without attachment. If I'm an empty cave with nothing in it, and thoughts come into this cave and reverberate and eventually dissipate, is that presence? Is there something that is retained by my cave brain that can be any identified change of state that can be attributable to whatever was heard? If not, then was there ever any meaning to it? Now, if there's some changed state inside my cave brain, then to me, I've retained something. I've heard something. I've actually incorporated it into myself. Now, to me, none of us comes empty. Okay, I know that that's one description of an attractive state, but we all have childhoods, we all have memory, we all have experiences, we all have triggers, we all have expertise, we all have agendas, we all have a place to go tomorrow. So if I hear something and it touches on some of these structures that are inside my cave, however few or however many there are, whether it's the eliciting structure or whether it's the agenda structure or whether it's the we structure or something else, if it impinges there and it alters my notion of what that is, so that after I heard it, I'm different in some way, then I've actually incorporated it and I've actually recognized that I came with something. I came with some experience. I came with some knowledge. I came with some memories. And that was shifted a bit by what I heard. If I have that model of how I show up, then I don't think it's a necessarily bad one. I'm trying to understand what it really means to come without that attachment, without that ownership. I own my memories, right? What more can be owned by someone other than my memories? So if I come up to an engagement like this and say, I heard something, let me ruminate on it. Let me think about it. Is it worth saying? Is it not worth saying? Let me try this out. Let me pose it. Let me see what comes back. Then there was a meaning, there was an action resulted, and hopefully a contribution made. But none of that was possible if my cave brain was empty. Now, maybe that's the right way to show up. Maybe the right way is to show up with my cave brain empty. I listen, I don't say anything, I'm calm, I go about my way. But I don't think that's what we're all doing here. We're all letting these utterances have some play inside our cave. It generates something that subsequently we feel compelled to express verbally. So I'm still struggling to understand what it means to show up without attachment, without ownership to anything. I really don't understand that statement. Over.
So I jump in. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I stepped out of the bus because I thought it's about we, but now we are at my favorite topic, which is moderation of time. And I thought, I've been telling you since 2 years and more what Farah is doing, how we trained about 20 young people to be such moderators. We call it magic round tables. And very often it's that the moderator is not moderating at all. The group is moderating itself, because it's through giving voice, to giving attention, and through eyes contact saying, you don't have speaking time anymore, where you acknowledge and empower by giving voice. All this in an open space in 1 hour, experienced and documented since 20 years. I'm a little bit exhausted and desperate that it's been never picked up. So maybe I should invite Farah to introduce how she was doing it with 150, 200 women in a cycle and like a spiral, to really, like in a fishbowl, make sure that it is finished in 1 hour, and still the group decides whom to empower. So all this, I think we should be focusing here one day. That's been one of my original motivations to join the experiments here with Fleming. And I soon have to catch the next bus.
Well, I think like some of the differences of are we showing up empty, are we showing up with a thing, doesn't matter very much to me if we share sort of an underlying intention to do something similar to what Sam described, that we are here because we want to like learn something, discover something, change, walk out a little bit changed. If we have that, that can be done in all sorts of different ways. I agree that it's not really done by coming in with your project that you need to present and like selling everybody on that. That's probably something to let go of. That what might mean to empty your mind, but it also might mean coming in with your passion and your inspiration you have now. That's maybe what needs to be added into the pool. At the same time, I cannot avoid then making something the other that I would not want in that situation. Like somebody coming in with just trying to convince the rest of us that, or with the rest of us, we don't get it. So let me explain how it works or help you a little bit to, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this like open mind of let's explore something and learn from each other and walk out enriched somehow. But even that's my assumption of what it of course is. Like when I show up here, of course that's what it is. So I'm a little bit shocked if somebody comes in with some other reason for being there. I don't even get it and I don't know what to do. So, and I realized that it can be managed a bit like with time management, like Heiner is talking about, like somebody was there for another reason. Well, we only give them 2 minutes and then we move on to something else. That's a way of managing it. I would prefer that it was somehow more explicit, but I've also realized that it cannot quite be done with words. It doesn't matter how much you specify in advance, this is what this meeting is about, this is the agreement. Some people are not going to read it, some people somehow don't get it, or they don't care, or something else is important and they know, here's some people they need to hear about, we need to take care of the children, that's what we need to do. They'll listen to me for this time. I mean, people come with many different kinds of baggage and reasons and so forth. I don't know where I'm going with this, other than the sort of awareness that I have a key piece that I feel need to be there of discovering, exploring together. And if it's not there, I'm sort of lacking a good tool other than sort of shutting people up or limiting them or explaining it or inviting them. I mean, there's lots of things one can do. Anyway, I'll shut up.
You've come to this point again, Fleming, that has to do with awareness. And we can't control people's awareness. However, we can screen to have people who have some sort of reflection of self-awareness to participate in a particular group. And while some people would experience that as being exclusive, it comes from this place in the Western culture, in my humble opinion, that somehow we're all equal, and we're not. We're all equal in spirit, but we are very unequal in skill and experience and cultural awareness and communication skills, even levels of the capacity of compassion and our own embodiment. So to assume that everybody who comes in is an equal or a peer is where we get, in my experience, where the trouble begins. And the challenge that happens when people come in with an agenda has everything to do with their lack of self-awareness. And that self-awareness and the reason that they derail a purpose comes out of a need for their own attention to be heard. And while the experiment itself, the conversation experiment, is to allow for everyone to explore that within themselves and within the group, it does become troublesome for me, and it has been in the conversations, because people, unfortunately, in the Western culture, are not used to actually attending something for the first time and being utterly silent to observe the flow. People in culture immediately, they need to jump in, define their space, identify to the others in the room how powerful and mighty they are and how intelligent they are. And it's really annoying to me, because my assumption is that if you know Fleming, you're brilliant, you're an expert in your field, and I really want to know you. So stop trying to prove it to me. So there you have it. I'll be done with that.
Sam.
And the fun thing about self-awareness is, in everyone's own mind, they're themselves a black belt, and everyone else is somewhere else on that spectrum. It's one of the smart people problems. If I may, I'd like to go back to the original question about we. And when I joined, I was hearing Doug, and I was hearing a little bit of concern about the way we sometimes is used in appropriating power in some way, if I might reword it. But I was also curious whether or not we want to acknowledge the notion in the way that the we can be a useful and empowering notion. In other words, there was a we that built the national highway system. Was that a good thing? Wasn't that not a good thing? You know, yeah, it created a lot of debris, a lot of concrete that enables people to go from place to place. There's a we that kind of standardize weights and measures to say, you know, this is how much a kilogram is, this is how much a liter is, etc. Is that empowering, or is that a dangerous agreement? So I'd like to ask this notion, do we have a we that is empowering and useful? Because I want to not necessarily leave without asking that question and having a sense that this notion of we is always one that is dangerous. Over.
I love that question. I really love that question. And I think it's sort of, for me, it lands right at the center of that idea of, is it projective or is it descriptive, right? And so I think the sort of concept of collective accomplishment of highway systems and weights and measures and the agreements underlying them, like you go on the right side of the road and we all agree a kilogram's a kilogram, until they change, of course, the thing they're using to reference what a kilogram is. But I guess there's an agreement dimension to we, which is sort of a trailing indicator that collective will agrees a kilogram's a kilogram. And there can be sort of a collective recognition of accomplishments that were the product of more than one, of a group and a period. But I mean, what immediately came to mind when you mentioned the highway example was, well, from the eye of the beholder, for the people that were pressed into service building those highways, were they reveling in it, or, in the middle of the desert, 110 degrees, pouring hot tar and breaking rock and whatever? You sort of have to wonder, the people that were the slave labor building the railroads, right? But we built a rail system, and, through whose eyes, and were the people who were driving, laying the ties and pounding the spikes, did they feel like this was their railroad? So it's just a great question. I don't purport to have an answer to it. I just love all the places that goes.
When you were asking the question, Sam, for me, during this entire conversation, and I want to just make a point of reference, by my clock it's 9, so we're really sort of coming to the end of our time. But I just wanted to say that my experience of the use of we, if someone is actually using that in the context of speaking within the group, that we are and we do, as opposed to that statement is referencing an assumed agreement straight across the board. When we're in a group speaking as individuals, any one person, and this goes back to, for me, to what Drug says, the person who speaks for the group as we holds a particular level of power. And then the individuation, or those humans who in their mind become triggered because I'm so different and I'm a we only to this point. So in the context of a group, if a statement of we has been agreed upon, we is fine. And there is some power in actually having this identification as a group. But going back to what Doug said, if we is being used to empower people, to motivate people, to inspire people, it really is a manipulation. It's trying to get somebody to be with you, whoever the we is that's speaking. So when we're in a community experience, speaking from an individual's point of view, to me, is much more clear. It's much more interconnected. which implies a we, but even better, because we're actually reaching both outward and inward. So we really are knitting together something. When you were talking, Sam, as you were referencing we, you're talking about us, you know, like third person, like we are something to someone else. In the group, I wouldn't ever say that we are all this. I would say Fleming, I would use a name, because that intimacy is what creates the we for me, if that makes any sense.
I would, yeah. I would like to have a clarity more ready of the different types of we, so that there's sort of a matter of fact we, and yes, I agree it maybe needs to have a facilitator or a voice of it, but as a matter of fact, like we people here have decided to sit down and meditate. It's a matter of fact thing. That's what we're doing. It's not an opinion thing. There's no, it doesn't make sense to show up and say, no, I disagree. We're not meditating. No, well, then you're not part of the group. That's stupid. And that's often what goes on. So I would like to protect and cultivate that kind of we, where some people actually want to do something together that needs a sort of a bubble around it. Well, go and do that. It shouldn't be possible to show up and just disagree or talk about something else and then derail it. If we're building the railroad, then the tracks need to go after. You cannot just show up and change the topic. I mean, that doesn't make sense. So I would like it to be that sort of obvious and clear, that in part to cultivate that when something feels like it needs to happen and some people want to make it happen, then it becomes a we that actually goes places. And that needs some protection and clarity so that it doesn't get changed by shoulds. You shouldn't do that, or it's wrong. Doesn't matter if it's wrong. We're walking over there. That's what we're doing. And at the same time, so lots of the we's are like just a should or somebody's idea about what could happen instead, or just an idea that popped into the top of the head. It's not a we at all, but it somehow in regular conversation we get confused and suddenly we don't know what we were doing any longer. So I'd like to cultivate more of that clarity. That's an ongoing discussion. We haven't completely figured it out, and we have passed the end of the hour. So let's wrap it up with any just how did you think this went? I didn't know where this would go. I certainly think we made some kind of progress or clarity. What do you guys think happened here?
I just want to say, after having been gone for a really, what seems like a long time, I actually love this. And I want to thank you all, whoever shows up. I just love this opportunity because it really, I really can feel you no matter where you are in the world. And it surprises me how intimate it can be through the internet. So I just want to thank you, and thank you, Fleming, for continuing to do this, because it's really the only place I get a chance to have this exploration.
Yeah, this was rich feast for me. Gratitude and appreciation to everybody here. And, you know, just especially Sam, I want to thank you for that question. And there's something, I'm going to do something with that question. Because everything out there is about creating we's. And your question is vastly more interesting and more valuable, which is, you know, is there a good one? So yeah, thank you for that.
All right. So unless there are any other concluding remarks, I would like to thank all of you. Sam has something. Go ahead.
2 very quick remarks. Thanks to everyone here. Thanks because I do know that came in late. So there was a potential to disrupt the energy of that forum that was here. So I especially was sensitive to that. Second thought is, it kind of surprises me because in my mind, there are many productive notions of we and instances of we that I could cite. So that's a fascinating perspective that you might have to think to see whether or not there are any. Okay, so that's an interesting conversation to have. And then the third for me, and then I'll wrap up, is to me, one of the ways in which we is used dangerously, and I've felt it and been triggered by it many times, is when someone in a space like this one, not this one particularly, but in a space like this one, says, wait, I'm trying to hold space for the group, and therefore, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that to me has always triggered me if someone says that after a statement that I've made. So I think that's one of the ways in which that we that Letitia was talking about is used in a way to sort of get me to, you know, back off a little bit. So anyway, thank you very much. I've been gone like you, Letitia, for many of these, but I enjoyed coming back.
I really enjoyed. It was two favorite topics of mine, so I stayed. But the time and the background noise is not good for me to really follow up on the two topics.
Cool. Well, thank you all for being here. It's been lovely. I don't know if I should say anything about we. I might get in trouble, but each one of you have been great, and maybe we have too. So anyway, see you another time. The what? Say it again.
We would enjoy hearing it.
Oh, you would? Do you mean you, or do you mean all of you?
I'm sorry.
Anyway, it's great. So to be further explored. So take care, everybody. See you another time. And come back, Sam and Letitia. We've missed you. I have missed you. So, so take care. See you again. Bye-bye.